everyone, and welcome back to Don't Open That Door. I'm Justin, and officer, I don't think I have to provide ID right now.
I'm Nico, and fuck you, won't do what you tell me.
I'm Dan, the deaf musician.
And we are here today to review Get Out. That's right, written and directed by Jordan Peele, this stars Daniel Kaluuya as Chris, Allison Williams as Rose, Bradley Whitford as Dean, Catherine Keener as Missy, and Lil Ray Howery as Rod. The movie opens with a young black man in a neighborhood that he's not comfortable in. It's like a white neighborhood and it's late at night, and he's like, you know what they do to guys like us in these kinds of neighborhoods. Unfortunately, his ill feelings prove to come true when he is literally snatched off the street. The scene then changes and we see Chris, a young black man, and his white girlfriend, Rose. He's kind of uneasy because they're getting ready to visit Rose's parents for the very first time together, and they don't know that Chris is black. On the way to their estate, Chris and Rose have an encounter with a cop that tries to stop and ID Chris, but Rose sticks up for him, and the two proceed to her parents' house. So, Dan, what happens after that?
So once they get to the house, Chris notices that the only black people that he can see are the groundskeeper and the housekeeper. So Rose's parents, however, do seem to be pretty accepting of Chris at first anyways, and they make quite a few facepalm worthy attempts to sort of relate to Chris and his, blackness. So it's revealed that Rose's family is actually hosting a party the following day. So later on, Chris actually goes to smoke or something outside, and on his way back in, he gets hypnotized quite literally by Rose's mother.
All right. So, Nico, how does that party go?
So, predictably, Chris is surrounded by white folks who ask him real on-the-nose probing questions, and others who just admire his physique to the point of just touching him without being prompted. It's weird. And he has an altercation with another black man who just becomes unhinged, telling him to get out when there's a freeze frame, and that's the title of the movie. Kidding. No, when he snaps his picture. Later on, Chris sends a picture to his friend Rod, who works for TSA, and Rod identifies him as someone that they used to know, but recently went missing. So Rod starts to get on the case, and he begins to put some clues together.
Okay. So, Dan, what happens after that?
So now Chris is starting to suspect that something is amiss, and he asks Rose if they can leave. And she's like, yes, fine, we can go if you feel uncomfortable. So upon attempting to leave, however, Rose's family intercepts Chris and kind of doesn't really let him leave. And we find out that Rose all along was working against him. So Rose's mother hypnotizes Chris again and puts him to sleep.
And immediately after, Chris awakens strapped to a chair. In front of him is a live video of a man explaining that he has essentially paid for the right to switch his mind into Chris's body. Terrified, Chris begins digging at the chair that he's in, and he actually reveals, the stuffing of his chair. And he smartly uses this to block his ears, which eventually guards him against Rose's mother's, hypnosis when she tries to put him to sleep for a second time. Chris manages to break free, and he attacks the family and attempts to escape, though he is pursued by Rose, who's chasing him down with basically like a rifle type deal. So what happens after that, Nico?
So, as Chris is fighting with Rose, a police car comes and intervenes. Rose begins to plead for help, thinking that it's the police, but in actuality, it's Rod who came out to save the fucking day, checking on his friend, because he knows better. The movie closes with Rod saying to Chris that he told him not to go into that house. He did, in fact, tell him so. But the situation was now handled.
Yeah, and that's, a very brief summary of the movie. So let's go ahead and, we'll start with the technical details. Audio. Dan, what do you have to say about that?
I thought the audio was fantastic. Coming from a technical perspective, I thought it was great. It all sounded incredible. The mix was great, I thought. And I thought the score and the choice of music was also fantastic. And there's a couple points where one of the first times that we see the maid, she kind of
Georgina?
Yeah, Georgina, thank you. She's not the first, but maybe the second or third time. It's sort of like a jump scare isn't quite the right word, but she sort of like quickly walks past like a doorway or something. You see her for like half a second, and there's a quick little sort of audio, music stab, but it's not a jump scare kind of stab, but it's like a soft jump scare. And I thought that was really tasteful, I guess.
Like softer piano dynamics as the only audible thing instead of just like, bah!
Yeah. So it was sort of like a quick little surprise, but not, again, not fully into the jump scare territory. And, if you've heard previous episodes, you know that I'm not too big of a fan of a lot of jump scares. And I just thought that the music in general was just really, really well done.
All right. And Nico, what do you think about the audio?
I also love it for even more reasons, two in particular having to do with the musical theory aspects of the composition of the soundtrack. So the first part is there is an African choir that's chanting in the beginning of the movie and the ending in the movie. And the choir has these pads of reverb and it sounds angelic, but the important thing is that the harmony to the choir is a tritone apart. So in layman's terms, that is one of the most dissonant notes intervals you can have in Western harmony, just because it doesn't math well. I can't explain it very well without getting in much more complicated stuff, but point is its music sound bad. And the only other thing that I wanted to quickly highlight is the motif of the whole tone scale that's played on the harp strings. Whenever Chris seems to start to notice that he's getting in over his head, there's this other scale called the whole tone scale that, because it's spaced out with every note it evenly spaced to each other, it just sounds very it sounds very unconventional, unfamiliar, and there's a long history of people using that scale in particular to get this sort of like, Alice in Wonderland, like, where are we going kind of thing. And I thought that was in particular very, very well done here.
Okay. And I guess my contribution to this is the fact that I thought that, and it's funny because now, as we know, Jordan Peele has gone on to kind of do his own thing with the Twilight Zone. But I actually thought there were several pieces of music that were reminiscent of shows kind of like The Twilight Zone.
Oh, yeah.
Just, where they would have, for example, Chris sitting there finding out that something was wrong or getting a really weird feeling. And, the score that would be playing to me would be reminiscent of things like The Twilight Zone.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's real quick on that, too, sort of coming from that side of things. The composer, Michael Abels, had never worked on film before, and
that's stunning. Holy shit.
Yeah, he's really sort of like specializes in sort of a more traditional concert music setting. So, like orchestral compositions, things like that, with heavy influence from blues, jazz, and African music too. I think that definitely kind of what you're talking about, Nico, with the theory side of it, and what Justin was saying, like I think a lot of those influences can be seen come from that sort of traditional concert music background.
I definitely say that, yeah.
Okay. And I guess now, changing gears here to the visual side of things, I will say that I really, really, really enjoyed the visuals and the cinematography in this, particularly the close-ups on people's faces throughout. There's kind of one scene where Chris is hypnotized for the first time and he's sitting there and he's in a weird kind of state where he looks terrified. His eyes are like red and like a tear's coming out, and he's saying like he can't move. And this film does this multiple times where it zooms so close into the face so you can see the emotion. Like it's very raw, it's very detailed.
Claustrophobic too.
And a similar thing actually happens with the housekeeper.
Yeah.
Because there's a moment where, Chris is talking to her and he's like, I feel uncomfortable. And later on, we learn that she's been taken over by Rose's grandmother. But there's a little bit of, the original person still left back. And she's almost kind of trying to break through. And I thought her expression was amazing. That kind of, it's so torn between crying and smiling.
That scene was so good. Oh my God.
I thought it was really good, as well as just, generalized. I thought a lot of the camera angles, again, were very reminiscent of things like The Twilight Zone.
And Hitchcock.
To me, those angles almost lent themselves to a little bit of the mystery subgenre, I would say. But Dan, I want to hear your take.
I mean, you've nailed it on the head for me. I mean, I just kind of pretty much echo your thoughts. Those close-ups were super powerful. I mean, the image that you kind of talked about with Chris sitting in the chair, that's sort of probably the defining screen grab of the film. It's on a lot of posters and stuff about it. And, this is the first time I had seen the film. So, of course, I knew about that scene, but, it hits different when you're watching it in the movie. Yeah, I mean, I just really echo everything that you just said.
All right. And Nico, anything to add on your end?
Yeah, and I'll be brief. The only thing that I will add to that is that I really, really enjoy the set design. The entire movie takes place in basically this one house, with the exception of just getting to the house pretty much. But they use that grounds, that estate really, really well. It looks haunting. It looks beautiful. And in later parts of the movie, it looks just frankly terrifying. I'm really impressed with how they just brought that together.
So I guess a good place to start can be the end. So Dan, there's the ending to the film that we've already discussed where Rod comes to save Chris, but there's an alternate ending where that doesn't happen. Why don't you go ahead and walk us through that?
Yeah, so in the real ending, or the ending that they chose to go with, Chris doesn't actually kill Rose. He's choking her out, and then Rod comes to save the day, sort of. In the alternate ending, Chris does end up killing Rose, and then cops come, and they're actual cops, and they end up arresting Chris, and he goes to jail. And then in the final scene, you see Rod speaking, going to visit Chris in jail, and Rod has been trying to, uncover more evidence and try to, break his friend out, or not break his friend out, but, try to pursue that. So Chris tells him, stop, it's not going to happen. You're fighting a losing battle. And he says, I beat it. And in the version that I was watching on Amazon, the alternate ending has Jordan Peele's commentary on top of it, which I thought was really interesting. Because one thing that he talked about was a lot of this movie was written, and at least probably not filmed, but definitely written during the Obama administration. The end that they chose to go with, he went with because he thought that, he was seeing, racism was starting to, I don't quite want to say go away, but was
less prevalent in the mainstream.
Right, yes, exactly. Less prevalent. That alternate ending was actually the original ending. So he thought that going with the original ending would be too much at that time. And when he had originally written that ending, racism was a little bit more rampant and everything. So I find that really interesting coming at it in 2021, and with obviously everything that's been going on the past, especially this past year and, last handful of years, I almost feel like at this time, I almost would have preferred the alternate ending, because I feel like that's more
contemporary almost.
Yeah, more. It hits harder. It's what we see and what we know and everything now, because racism is back in the mainstream and unfortunately all over the place. I guess what are you guys' thoughts on that?
So I would say that, well, first off, a slight nod in case, because we didn't really get to cover it too deep in the summary, that Rose's family, essentially, Rose is a lure, and she lures black men and a woman as well to their estate. And from there, basically, the parents capture them and auction them off to rich white people who want to transfer their consciousness into these people's bodies. They started with the housekeeper and the groundskeeper.
Wow, we kind of buried the lead there, eh, lads?
Yeah.
Fucking wow! It's like one of the main plot points.
With the grandmother and grandfather. So given that context, I actually think as well that I would prefer the alternate ending because to me, and like we said just now, I guess when it was being written during this would have been the very end of the Obama administration, right?
Well, I think he wrote it like a while before.
Yeah, because it was filmed in 2017, I think.
Right. And he had written it a while before. I never thought that I was ever going to see the light of day or be a movie or anything.
Okay.
And then a few years
Okay.
later, he thought it was time. So
Okay. I mean, I will definitely say that, and to clarify, even though we've already said it, no one here thinks that racism went away when Obama was president or anything, but rather I guess the focus in mainstream media and to some extent the mainstream consciousness of America, it was not nearly as talked about as it is nowadays, especially in the light and subtext of police brutality.
Yeah.
So, given that, I kind of feel like in 2021 the alternate ending is the real ending for what we are seeing nowadays, at least. But Nico, I hold tight to your opinion. What do you think?
So I just want to say the official DOTD stance is unequivocally that Black Lives Matter. Just wanted to get that out there first off. I prefer the theatrical ending just as sort of like a artifact of the time that it was in and a snapshot of what the director, Jordan Peele, what he wanted to do and how he chose to evolve and release his medium as the world was changing around him. I think that's pretty cool that he did that. And, I respect his decision either way. And I'm just glad that, we live in a time where we can see movies with alternate endings as a pretty regular thing. Like, I just think it's awesome that sometimes directors include that as a general thing, as a feature, rather.
Would you call that kind of the more hopeful ending, maybe?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's definitely hopeful more so just because, Chris doesn't end up in jail. But in the other one, Jordan Peele talked about this as well. But there is a bit about he sort of faces his own demons in the end when he goes back for Georgina in hopes to save her and that she's actually woken up and not really the grandma. But in saying in the end scene, he's like, yo, I'm good. Like, I've made peace with it. So there is a certain somber hopefulness there in some way. I'm not getting it quite justice, but there's something there. I just don't know how to put it into words.
All right. So now let's go ahead and, change the topic up a little bit. This was something that we talked about, in the pre-show, and I think it's worth mentioning now. For some reason, Rotten Tomatoes has the categories, at least.
Yeah, this is fucked.
In the genre. So we've got horror, mystery and thriller, and comedy. I mean, that's a stretch. This movie, it has certain comedic moments, namely the ones with Rod. And, there we get some, I almost kind of feel like
love Rod.
Much needed kind of a break almost from some of the tension
Oh, absolutely.
in the scenes that he's in. But I wouldn't go. So I would not categorize this under the subgenre of comedy in any way, shape, or form.
I wouldn't either.
Do you think that it was done, Dan, maybe because of Jordan Peele's comedy background?
it could be it. I mean, because, this was his first horror movie. And like you said, I mean, there's some funny moments with Rod, but just because there is comedy doesn't mean it is a comedy. There's plenty of movies that have, crack a couple jokes, but it's not a fucking comedy. I don't really see how this movie is funny, aside from, the couple moments of comedic relief. But I'm really curious as to how that got there. I mean, I didn't even think about Jordan Peele's background. That may be why. That's a good point.
True. Nico, any thoughts?
Yeah, I will say that I think the comedy was definitely, first off, intentional, but this is definitely, or rather the comedic elements, this is not a comedy at all. The only thing I will say is the first time I saw this in theaters, the theater was cracking up a lot at the scenes with Rod when those were placed. It wasn't happening all the time, but it's like y'all were saying, they were punctuating the tension. It was an aperitif after getting your blood pressure raised.
Got you. So now let's go ahead and talk about a little bit of the symbolism or the tropes kind of throughout the movie. So I'll go ahead and lead off here. So one of the major things I think that jumped out to me were, I was, and I mean, obviously because Jordan Peele wrote it, so he would know, but literally, and I was telling this to Nico, in the first half an hour of this movie, I literally connected with every single thing that happened to Chris. Literally every single thing that happened to Chris has happened to me at some point in time in my life. So it was refreshing, isn't the right word, but I love the way that it was woven into the story. Particularly, for example, the scene where Rose's father talks to Chris and he's always going, my man, and all this stuff like that. And it's kind of like a thing where it's not code switching, because to me, code switching is switching between, dialects or languages that are natural to you. This is how you talk, but you're just changing it based on your scenario, versus that's not how Rose's father talks.
Yeah, it's very forced.
He's just talking that way because there's a black man in the room. That's literally something that has happened, I mean, all over the place to me, when people find out where I'm from. And there's also moments where, and again, it's absolutely mad how this is kind of one of the first mainstream movies I've ever seen to do this. But when they ask him, Chris, they ask him basically to speak for his people, the classic like, oh, well, how do all black people feel? Chris, how do all black people feel? And it's literally one of those things where I mean, I've been asked to speak for, my religion / my race before. So
you were the arbiter of Trinidad, Justin.
So it's literally just like, oh, I can relate to that. And it's fucking crazy how well that's woven into the story. But Nico, what else do you see?
So I want to talk about one symbol in particular that I just adore. And I adore the symbol of a deer. So in the film, we see the imagery of a deer quite often, always dead or, en route towards being dead. So in the hypnosis scene, the first time where Chris is hypnotized by Rose's mother, in the sort of vulnerable state of hypnosis, he mentions that his mother was, died on the side of the road, and someone could have potentially gone and, saved her, but he just stayed inside, and this guilt is eating him alive and just destroying him. And then right at the beginning of the movie, we have a scene where, the deer hits Rose and Chris's car, and we see this scene echoed right in front of his eyes, not quite realizing the significance yet. But the thing that I love the most about this is the coup de grace of this sort of just arc of symbolism and imagery here. I fucking adore that Chris uses the taxidermy deer head and antlers to just completely fucking skewer the doctor, because in that moment he is, he's reclaiming his past. He's saying he's not going to be a passive entity in this anymore, and he isn't going to just stand by and let bad things continue to happen, which is echoed further when he does go back for Georgina.
All right. Dan, any tropes or symbolism that you saw that you want to bring up?
One thing kind of to the point you were making, Justin, about, I mean, obviously this film is all about racism and everything, but I really liked how Jordan Peele wrote it, in that at first it, as a white person, it almost seems innocuous, if that's the right word. Sometimes like there were certain phrases or certain things that people said that I didn't even catch, that like if I caught it, I would have been like, oh yeah, that's a little, they're, like you said, not quite code switching, but, changing the way they talk. Like I didn't even realize that the father was saying my man until Rose was like, oh my God, my dad's saying my man all the time. Like I didn't even catch that. But, the first one or two little things that happen, I feel like, at least coming from, a white person, me, like I feel like I didn't even realize that was happening. And then after that, yeah, okay, they get, more and more egregious, I guess is the word for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to sort of culminating to the point where the one lady is like, oh my God, his build and, touching him and everything like that. She's very much like fetishizing, the black body and everything. And just how whenever somebody would say something a little off, the camera would zoom in on Chris and his face. And, he's kind of like, yep, okay, I know. Yep, I see all that happening. And it sort of opened my eyes a little bit to just not necessarily the things that I particularly say, but just things that I don't quite catch all the time. And yeah, I thought that was really cool of sort of bringing awareness to that. And then obviously it snowballs and accumulates and becomes more and more, again, egregious. But I just really like how that was introduced very small at the beginning and then kind of grew and grew and grew.
Well, and I'm going to talk about this a little more when I kind of give my final thoughts on the movie, but that's what I loved. Because this movie would have been, I think, somebody who is not as good as Jordan Peele could have put in a lot of these elements and talking points about racism, but it's one thing to have them in the story and it's another thing to weave them so well. And I think that, from Jordan Peele's perspective, as he's writing this, it's crazy how much I relate to this and what he's talking about, because any, person of color can tell you, how you might find a situation where somebody does something like that, whether it's, the whole my man thing, or they talk about, what is it? There's something else. Oh yeah, Tiger Woods, he's black, so he must like Tiger Woods or something else like that. God, yeah. And the thing though is this, and this is where I think the movie's writing is so impeccable. Sometimes these remarks are made by people who sincerely don't have any ill meaning behind it, and it is innocuous. And so they even have the conversation where Chris and Rose, after they meet the parents for the first time, they talk, and Chris is like, it wasn't that bad. Trust me, I've seen way worse. And that's kind of, I feel like, the level where a lot of us are at, where, like we run into something like that, and then it's like, oh, kind of like, a warning, yellow card, but I'm not going to sit here and like fight you over this. I'm not going to like do whatever. I'm not going to raise a scene about it. Like, I've been faced time and time again, with the classico, oh, you're really well spoken. For what? For what, dog? So, it's one of those things where, yes, you take it, you see it, it happens. And sometimes it is literally innocuous, whether or not, that is something that should be corrected. There are some people who do that without any sincere ill will. But this movie takes that, and it takes that kind of giving people the benefit of the doubt. But wait a second, these people actually don't deserve that at all. They're actually evil as fuck. So I really like the way that it starts off at such a place that so many of us see and relate to every day, and then it spirals downwards. I say this as most people know about where I'm from already, but I'm an ambiguous brown man. If you saw me on the street,
the most vague superhero you've ever heard of,
you would not know what the fuck
man.
I was. If you saw me on the street, you could not guess my ethnicity. I promise you. So go ahead.
One other thing that I thought was interesting was all of the sort of racist comments or, under the table kind of comments, or even the more, bigger plot point, like trying to take black people's bodies. It was all related to physical traits.
Correct.
Nobody ever once complimented, I don't think, him on anything other than physical attributes. And I think that the movie kind of showed that, played into the whole like, oh, black people are physically superior, but they're, white people have better, brains or whatever, that whole thing. Because, the white people in the movie wanted to keep their brain and their conscious intelligence, but live in a physically better body. And even there's one art dealer who was blind, who, obviously didn't start blind, and then he became blind. And even he was like, he's the one that wanted to take Chris, that he was supposed to be, put into Chris's body for Chris's eyes. And, at first I guess that can be taken two ways because Chris is a photographer. So,
Right.
Your eye as a photographer, like photography and, creative things are so much more than just, you don't just take a picture. Like you have to frame it right, the artistic decisions behind it. And there's a lot of mental creativity and things involved. But you can also look at it just physically. I want your eyes. My eyes don't see. I want eyes that do see. So I feel like a lot of things in this movie really are just talking about or getting at that people don't see black people as intelligent. It's just
people.
physical.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you bring up that the blind art dealer, because I thought he was an example of to me kind of almost like a false ally, because he was the one person who Chris actually spoke to,
He was a
white person.
libertarian.
He was the one white person who Chris spoke to kind of more relaxed. They talked about, the photographer was talking about how he knew of Chris's work and how he respected it. And he was like, I'm blind. And they talked about how sometimes, man, life ain't shit. Like life is not fair at times. I think they both kind of had a place where they could relate. And that's why Chris was more ready to open up to him and talk to him. But at the same time, despite the fact that he supposedly respected Chris and everything else, he still also wanted to take and profit. Mm-hmm. And he was kind of that guy who was also, well, I don't really see race. Because he says, I don't care what color you are. I just want your eyes.
Hey, I'm blind, Lamau.
Yeah. I mean, he literally was supposed to be the person who's blind to color because he can't see. But at the same time, that's what he was doing. And as we're talking about, some of these different characters, there is one character in particular that I also want to talk about. Everybody in this movie is either white or black, except I think maybe potentially there's like a police chief who's in a quick cutaway who may not be, he might be Hispanic. I couldn't tell. I don't know. He was ambiguous like me. But everyone in this film is pretty much white or black, with the exception of there is an Asian guy who's also at the party. And I could not help but wonder, Nico, I mean, why do you think they chose to include an Asian person at this party?
So I think that has got to be a reference to the idea of the model minority, of which the Asians were, and I suppose still are, categorized into by people who are just stereotypical and racist. The idea being there that, they're the good ones. And I wanted to make some emphasis in particular on the model part of model minority, because in context of this freaky fucking family, there's some alliteration for you. In context of this family, we don't ever find out who that person is inhabiting or who the soul is occupying that body, but that was probably literally someone who just was like, hey, I want to have an Asian guy, and he got an Asian guy.
If he was inhabited at all, I mean, we don't actually know.
I mean, I can't imagine that another minority would ever go up to. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, and/or Justin, say something. I cannot imagine another minority going up to a black person saying, hey, what are the advantages and disadvantages of being black?
Yeah. I mean, you're right.
So,
please tell me that hasn't happened to you, Justin.
So I disagree.
Okay, fair enough.
I disagree because, and some of these ideas I kind of researched after watching the movie and read a couple different pieces, because I think it is worth noting that there are some, Asian American and Asian commentators who have said that they found some aspects of the portrayal of the character, whose name is Hiroki Tanaka. He's portrayed by Yasuhiko Oyama, who's a martial artist. And this movie does talk about martial arts a couple times throughout.
That's true.
He is the only person who engages with him on a philosophical level. And it's also kind of in the context of everything that's happening around, it's a very tone deaf, basically offensive comment to make. But I almost kind of feel like first off, he's asking because he might also potentially want to transfer into the body as well.
Oh, yeah, no, that wasn't subtle in the least. I'm just saying, I think that, well, you already heard what I thought.
Yeah. I also think, though, that he's actually meant to be a representation of how, because he speaks with an accent. He's clearly not American.
Right.
And I feel like that also shows the willingness of white people to even accept, somebody from another country before they accept a black person.
Exactly, yeah.
So I guess that was the reading. That, and obviously what you made the point about when it comes to the model minority, trope. So I also really, really quickly wanted to touch on what I consider to be kind of the ultimate irony of this movie. Remember, if you will recall, there's the part where Rose says, my dad's going to say that he would have voted for Obama 3 times if he could have. And literally, Rose's dad tells Chris, hey, just so you know, I would have voted for Obama 3 times if I could have. And it's, almost saying these things to kind of attempt to put in this situation a black person at ease by saying, hey, I like black people, I voted for Obama. Or, that's almost kind of like the same thing as like, hey, I like black people, I like rap music. Or hey, I like XYZ, And it's funny to me, and it's kind of ironic because there's a lot of people that I feel like this movie is talking about.
Oh, for sure, dude.
Who would say, what are you talking about? I love Get Out. This movie can't be talking about me. I'm not that person in the movie. And I think that's almost kind of like the final laugh, the final joke, the big gotcha of the whole thing is this movie is directly talking about what I believe to be the majority of its audience, which is, to me, it's kind of funny in a kind of fucked up way. It's kind of funny to me.
I mean, that's true. And I feel like, as kind of I was saying earlier, like there's definitely things that, I mean, I feel like I fall into that category too. There's definitely things where I might not even realize that I'm doing something and it's obviously not intentional, but there's certain phrases or something that I might say that could be taken or that are taken a different way or, have different context than I mean it to be. So, I mean, there's definitely, I think probably you're right. Like the vast majority of people who watch this movie, non-minorities, I guess, white people, it probably applies to. Absolutely.
So I don't know. I just, that really tickled me when I got finished watching it. I was like, yeah, because it's facts. It's very true. It's very true. So let's go ahead now. And I had to craft this very, very delicately. What would you do? So I'm not black, but I've been in situations like this many times. So for the sake of this one, you two are my friends, right? And we all live in city X. I mean, we can say New York, New Jersey, wherever. We live in city X. And, so I have a white girlfriend and she's taking me out to her family residence for the weekend or something like that. Step 1. If I texted you guys and was like, hey, people are acting really weird around here, what would you say? What would your advice be?
I'd be like, yo, get your guard up. I wouldn't be like, leave immediately, but I'd be like, yo, keep an eye out. Like, if you think something's funny, then something's probably funny.
True?
Yes, but I would be much more laissez-faire about it. I would probably just text you, lol fucking white people or something.
Also, depending on how you said it, if you actually got me worried, I might be like, yo, what's your addy? Let me know so I can call the cops later or like investigate.
So let's say, I'm like, hey guys, something's going on here. These people are freaking me out. And then my phone goes dead and you can't reach me for like 2 days.
Nah, that is where.
Where?
Yep. That's where I'd be like, especially because I think at that point, I think Chris had also already told Rod, yo, I think her mom hypnotized me. Yo,
yeah, that
as
too.
soon as you said, yo, her mom hypnotized me, I would have been like, fuck out. Like, get the fuck out of there. Like,
Yep, straight out.
No, like, nope.
So another kind of scenario now would be, let's say we had a friend, maybe, or not a friend, but someone we knew who disappeared. And all of a sudden I found him at this party, but he's acting really weird. And I text you the picture and you guys are like, nah. What would you, if you had to go to the police like Rod did, what would you tell the cops? Because I mean, what Rod said doesn't get over at all. He's literally laughed at.
I would say that there was a kidnapping and my friend was kidnapped, because that's so much more to the goddamn point.
Yep. Also, Nico and I are white, so I feel like the police unfortunately, would have a different perspective or different response.
Mm-hmm.
So, which I think is sort of another point that the movie makes too, by the way. But I would tell the police, and I would not joke around about it as like kind of Rod sort of did. Maybe not joking, but in Rod manner. But yeah, I mean, I would say I agree with Nico. Yo, my friend was kidnapped. This other person was kidnapped, and look, they just showed up. I know he's on your missing persons list. Look, he's right here.
So at what point in time would you come drive out to get me?
Probably
then.
right then.
That's what's up. That's what's up. Okay. So, but would you say Rod made too many missteps outside of talking to the police the way he did?
No, I think no, because when I watched the movie, there were certain times where I was like, oh, he should have done that earlier or done that before. But then when I think about it, I feel like he did pretty similar to what I would have done. Like there's a point where when he's trying to call Chris and can't get a hold of him, eventually Rose picks up. And of course, she's in on it. So she's acting like she doesn't know what happened. And she's like, oh my God, like Chris left our place and he should have been back there by now. Like he didn't get there. What's going on? And that's when Rod realizes, oh, she's in on this. Like something's not right. So he puts her on hold and then starts a recording of the phone call. But then she figures out that he's doing that. So she switches around when he gets back on the phone and she's like, oh, Rod, you've always had a thing for me and, whatever.
Bro, can I tell you how much that scene
She's a fucking genius.
Can I tell you how much that scene fucking boiled my fucking guts, bro?
Mm-hmm.
That shit is so fucking one-to-one, that shit that happens in real life, man.
I believe it, man.
I was like, fucking hell. Because that is so fucking true. That's so fucking true. That like, that whole manipulation, that whole able to flip things and turn a story and be believed. Like, fuck out of here with all that bullshit, man. And that's one of the reasons I like this movie. So let's go ahead now and swap over to, if you had to call out one favorite scene from this film, what would it be? I think I would have to go with one. So there's a scene where, to me, it's the first really big oh shit scene in the movie. Chris, is at the party and he goes upstairs to grab his phone. And when he goes upstairs, everyone's talking. And once he goes up the stairs, dead silence. And everyone's looking up and listening to his footsteps. I was like, oh shit. Oh shit. I thought that was fucking badass. Dan, how about you?
I think my favorite scene was when Chris, shortly after they get to the place, and at night Chris goes to get a cigarette. Eventually the mom hypnotizes him. But before that, he goes outside, and on his way out, like I think I kind of mentioned before, Georgina kind of steps past the door and there's sort of that little music cue. And then while he's outside, the groundskeeper starts running towards him, like just full on running towards him. And then at the last moment just kind of veers off to the side. And I think Georgina's up in the window too. And there's just a lot of things that to me was the first point that really like put me off kilter. And I was like, oh, something's going on. Like, man, this is weird. And I feel like all the actions that those side characters took were just so weird and so not relatable that it just put me off in a good way, like, off kilter. And I really like that.
Nico, how about you? Anything from your end?
I just love the scene where he kills her dad with the fucking deer head, but also shout out really quick to the scene where Chris is talking to Georgina after the scene that Dan just described, and we just see this just harrowing struggle that she's going through when you can tell that there's part of whoever is left down in the sunken place inside her is trying to fight back. And it's just such a good scene.
For true. So I'm also going to give a quick shout out to the scene at the very end where, so we mentioned before that when Chris he flashes a photo of a black man at the party. He's the guy who went missing before.
Andre.
And The Flash, I guess, kind of undoes temporarily the conditioning, and the the original personality is able to come out for a little bit. He does that to the groundskeeper, and the groundskeeper immediately takes the gun, shoots Rose, and then he shoots himself so he can't be controlled again. And I was like, damn, like that's respect. Like I gotta respect that piece.
Yeah.
Because I mean, he was like, fuck that. I'm not about to be controlled. Fuck that. Like, nah, I'll end it on my terms. I respect that. I respect that scene. Any criticisms? Any minor, major, any big criticisms from you guys?
Not really that I can think of, to be honest. I don't know that I considered it a perfect movie, but I don't really have, nothing really stood out as a criticism to me.
I only have one really minor passing one, and that's every now and again. And I found Rod to be hilarious. There was once or twice
Same.
where I was like, I don't necessarily know if I would do that. Like if I was really trying to convince the police that like my friend had been kidnapped,
yeah,
I would not
that's
cook up
true.
some shit about a sex cult. And he literally sits there with a piece of paper and is like scratches out some shit. Nah, magic ain't real. I'm like, bro.
He does sort of play into that comedic part a little bit too much occasionally. I do agree with
Yeah.
that.
That's just very minor gripe. But anything from your end, Nico?
The only no, honestly, I really enjoy this from start to finish.
All right. So let's go ahead now and take a look at the critical review. So on Rotten Tomatoes, which is an aggregator, of course, this has a 98% fresh from critics and an 86% from the audience. So on a scale from 1 to 100, where would you put this? Dan?
I think I'm going to say 92. I really enjoyed this movie. Obviously, a ton of depth to it, a lot of commentary on race issues and everything like that. And even all that aside, I just thought it was a quality horror movie. Like it just did the job really well, built tension throughout the movie, and sort of all the things that we talk about on pretty much every film, I thought it did very well as well. And in addition to all of the societal and race commentary as well. So.
Nico, how about you?
I'm going to give it a 95. I've been, trying to think of reasons for not making that higher, but this is one where I am going to fully admit that I'm certain there are things that definitely went over my head as well as someone who is in fact white, but for just the purely film aspect of it and the way that it touches on all the different themes that it does, it's so fucking well done.
Me, myself, I'm going to give it a 90. I think that the premise of the story, if you were to remove the racial aspect of the story and just come up with they're trying to take over this person or they're doing this XYZ.
It'd still be a good ass movie.
No, it would. And there have been movies that have done that before. But I think where this one particularly shines is, first off, Jordan Peele is a real student of the game. I mean, he wears his influences on his sleeves. You love to see it. And I think what really kind of bumps this up for me and really takes this to the next level is, and again, I'm not black, but I am a minority in this country. And the way that he blends social issues into this horror movie, it's unreal. It's unreal. It is an American perspective, no doubts, but it's unreal the way that he does it. It's super masterful. I'm somebody who's very critical. I don't like lazy, I put this in here just to say something, even if it's, doesn't sit right. Like, no, like he blends the fibers throughout perfectly, fucking perfectly. And for someone to do that on their horror debut, that's fucking unheard of. Like, that's astounding. And, I think honestly, like on the real, we're so lucky to be able to see somebody like this, because if Jordan Peele continues down this path, then he's going to be talked about the same way that, we talk about people.
Spoiler alert, he does.
Kind of like, Hitchcock or any of the other greats. We're going to be talking about him the same way because this was really good. This is really good. So that's where I put it at. So let's go ahead now and, let's throw it all on the table. Would you recommend this one to a friend? I would.
Yes.
For sure.
Golden seal of approval?
You already know.
Absolutely.
Yep. All right. This movie gets the golden seal of approval. And do we have any last thoughts? Because, there was a lot in this movie that, just for the sake of time, we couldn't cover. But any last quick thoughts to get off your chest before we bring this one to a cease, gents?
Yeah, do you see why I've been trying to get you to see this for 4 fucking years now?
I've been preparing myself.
Fuck off.
I do have one quick thing. And apparently, Ewan McGregor had avoided watching horror films for a very, very long time because I guess he had a traumatic experience watching Halloween, which I think is kind of funny because the first scene in this movie is very directly Halloween, like very similar to the first scene in Halloween. But he watched this film and he stated that this film sort of changed his perspective because he saw that people are using the genre for social commentary and things like that. And I think that's incredible. And that's like, I love to see a good quality movie, especially one that has societal commentary and undertones and just anything else. And I love to see art being used for that purpose and to make its point and make it so well that people are like, damn, this changes my perspective on this genre or what it's commentating on or commenting on or, whatever. I just really love that. So, yeah.
Well, if you like what you've heard, or if you have something you want to add to the conversation, go ahead and hit us up. We're on Instagram and Twitter at DOTV Horror. We're also on Facebook. Don't open that door. But that's been it from your boys, Nico, Dan, and Jus. Keep yourself safe. Definitely, bearing in mind the context of this movie, be good to one another. And please, dear listener, don't open that door. Bye.